December 2nd, 2002. This is TVography.
The Partridge Family. With matching outfits and catchy melodies, this TV family was the epitome of groovy. Welcome to TVography, our look at classic shows and the stars that made them great. The Partridge Family asked the question, what should a hip, single suburban mom with a brood of talented kids do in 1970s America? The answer was to take their singing act on the road in a multicolored bus. The show proved an enormous success, but for this lyrical TV family, life wasn't always harmonious.
They were the first family of primetime pop. 6 velvet-clad musicians in a multicolored bus, they shot to the top of the charts, winning millions of fans and selling millions of records.
They had no idea they were going to have the rock star of the century in their television show.
There'd be thousands of women. Open the door and it was Keith. There was pandemonium. People freaking out and fainting.
The Partridge Family, the flock that rocked. In the late 60s, a new breed of TV show was created. Melding situation comedy with rock music, the Monkees stormed the Billboard charts and won an Emmy. Hoping to strike a similar chord, Bernard Slade, who had earlier created The Flying Nun, came up with The Partridge Family. Modeled after a real-life family of pop musicians called the Cowsills, it would be a show about a widow and her children touring the country in a psychedelic multicolored bus.
Screen Gems had done a series called The Monkees. They wanted to be an anarchistic, sort of Beatles-type show. And I thought, well, they hadn't done really a middle-of-the-road comedy with music before that I can recall.
Slade came in my office one day and said, it was the Cowsills, was a singing group, and he thought it would be a good idea to see if we could do a TV show that way. So we went out and visited with them, and we realized that aside from the little girl, she was adorable, and the rest of them were really not too fascinating, and they had no acting experience at all.
Slade knew he needed more than a colorful set of wheels and pop singers who couldn't act. He needed talent. After completing the pilot script, Slade sent a copy to Shirley Jones, who had previously turned down the role of the mother on The Brady Bunch.
Somebody came to me with a script and said, how would you like to do a television series? And at that point, agents, managers, the powers that be said, are you crazy? Don't do a series. You know, television was a no-no at that point. If you were a movie star, you didn't do television. It was supposedly then a step down.
Shirley was my nearly great mistake because I didn't want her. I wanted someone that was more exciting. It was a dreadful mistake because she was absolutely perfect, as it turned out, for the show.
I read the script of The Partridge Family, and I loved it. I loved the fact that it had music. I thought, what a great idea.
Casting the children's parts wouldn't prove so easy. Executive producer Bob Claver interviewed 850 kids, eventually narrowing the pool to 10 for screen tests with Jones. Little did she realize that a very familiar face was shortlisted for the role of Keith Partridge, the band's frontman.
I'd been testing with all the little kids and the other parts, and then they asked me to come to the office one day and they said, listen, we need to ask you this question. How do you feel about your stepson, David Cassidy? I said, you know, he's a nice guy, nice boy. Why? And they said, well, we're considering him for the role of Keith Partridge, your son. And I said, sure, I think that's a great idea. Well, David came on the set, and I walked in, and he said, what are you doing here? I said, I'm your mama, sweetheart. He said, no.
19-year-old David Cassidy, son of screen veteran Jack Cassidy, was fresh on the Hollywood scene. Guest appearances on hit shows like Bonanza, Ironside, and Marcus Welby, M.D. had earned him an introduction to the teenage fan magazine set, prompting profiles in Tiger Beat and 16. David so looked the part of the adolescent Adonis, no one even bothered to ask if he could sing.
David walked in and he just kicked it. He was great. He could act. He was sophisticated. He could portray an innocence that he was beyond. He could be Keith Partridge. He had it all, and he had that hair.
17-year-old newcomer Susan Day had graced the covers of Glamour and 17 magazine. Based on looks alone, she was slated for the part of the ethereal, idealistic Laurie Partridge.
Basically, we wanted a very pretty girl that teenage boys would go crazy for. Then we had to do something with her, because she wasn't an actress, she was a model. But, you know, she had this great face and great charm.
Wasn't great with reading lines so much as listening, which once you see an actor and actress that can listen and really be interesting, you know they're going to be okay. They'll learn how to do the rest, and she certainly did.
Love it.
Young Danny Bonaducci, who had done some work in commercials and on family sitcoms like Mayberry RFD, Bewitched, and The Ghost and Mrs. Muir, proved to be an immediate comic talent.
There was another kid up for that part that everybody liked. This is where I was right. Jerry Himes, who was head of Screen Gems at the time, said, look, you're the producer. If you want him, you have him, and you better be right. And he left the room. And, of course, I was. I mean, that was an easy call, I thought. Danny was very funny. You know, he didn't know what he was saying half the time, and it was funny.
She has a body that won't quit.
I got very lucky that they said to me, now this kid is the financial wizard of the Partridge Family. He's very into money, but we need this kid to come off as cute and precocious, not greedy and money hungry. Do you understand the difference? And I said, yeah, here's the problem. Most people misinterpret this quote. And sure enough, they bit and said, what quote? And I said, everybody thinks that the quote is, money is the root of all evil. And it is not. The love of money is the root of all evil. Danny Partridge doesn't love money. He just wants a new mini bike. Boom, I had the job.
The youngest roles in the Partridge Clan, Chris and Tracy, were won by rookie actors Jeremy Gelbwax and Suzanne Crowe.
Back off.
To serve as surrogate father, comedian Dave Madden was cast as Reuben Kincaid, the band's hapless manager and Danny's comic foil.
Dave Madden, possibly one of my all-time favorite human beings. Just everything he ever did made me laugh. Bad influence. By today's standards, he might be arrested.
With the Partridge cast in place, it was time to take a look at the family portrait. One noticeable feature stood out right away.
Dave Madden came up to me one day, and he said, Danny, I want to talk to you a minute. I'm 10. He said, do you know why we got these jobs? And I said, well, I did a really good audition. He said, no, we're ugly. I said, excuse me? I'm 10 years old. He goes, we're ugly people, you and I. And look at Shirley Jones and David Cassidy, Susan Day. They're beautiful. They needed some ugly people on the show, and that's how you got the job. So I don't look at it and see a real family. I see a bunch of beautiful people in me.
The Partridge family tree had been planted. Little did anyone realize the hit it was about to become. The year was 1970. Apollo 13 was launched. U.S. troops invaded Cambodia. Student protesters were gunned down at Kent State. Jimi Hendrix and Janis Joplin overdosed, and the Beatles released their final album. On television, Marcus Welby, MD, was America's #1 rated show. Audiences were fired up over cowboy dramas like Bonanza and Gunsmoke, and detective vehicles such as Ironside, Hawaii Five-0, and the Mod Squad. Comic variety shows like The Flip Wilson Show and Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In reeled in viewers as well. But family sitcoms like The Beverly Hillbillies and Bewitched were falling off the ratings radar. To beat those odds, a new sitcom would need a new twist.
It was a kind of interesting time for both TV and rock and roll in the way they were interacting. They were very wary of each other still. It's the early 70s, you know, the Beatles are very hot, you know, it's a kind of revolutionary time in rock music, and TV doesn't like revolution because that's too hot, and this is a cool medium. And so how do we tame that? And the way to tame that is to bring a family into it. And so it was an interesting way to combine kind of the Brady Bunch with the Monkees.
The very same formula that worked for the Monkees was applied. Music producer Wes Farrell gathered major songwriting talents, such as Carole King, Paul Anka, and Neil Sedaka, to pen tunes for the Partridges. Shirley Jones was to sing lead vocals, while the rest of the cast would lip sync and pretend to play their instruments. Seasoned studio musicians would do the rest.
We were just looking for actors. Anybody can lip sync.
But a hidden talent stepped up to the mic. Accomplished guitarist David Cassidy auditioned for the show's producers by singing along to a Crosby, Stills and Nash record. Heads immediately turned. The Partridge Family's first single, I Think I Love You, was released weeks before the pilot aired. It would go on to become one of the best-selling records of 1970.
The disc jockeys would automatically tag it, you know. New hit tune from the Partridge Family coming in the fall. You know, it's a kind of space you couldn't afford to buy.
The Partridges were poised to storm the pop culture scene. Everyone involved could feel the good vibration of a hit, even if the actors weren't feeling the vibrations from their actual instruments.
They tried not to show the hands, tried not to show anybody actually playing anything.
You know, I didn't play an instrument. I don't believe anyone did.
The only advice I ever got about the Partridge Family was from David Cassidy, and we're doing a musical number, and I'm playing my bass. And finally he turns and he's bee red and he grabs my bass and he goes, "You don't strum the bass, you pluck it." I went, "You're okay, super freak, whatever. I'll pluck it."
The on-camera instrumental antics may have caused a few snickers, but behind the scenes, the musical masterminds knew exactly which strings to pull.
Screen Gems Music at the time had some of the best writers in the business and some of the best producers in the business.
There's a tremendous amount of talent, even behind shows that you think are fluffy and disposable.
That music was incredible. Those were some of the best written songs for that purpose that, you know, people have heard.
The songs may have been catching, but they weren't exactly tunes that David Cassidy wanted to play.
When the music first started getting played, they weren't a bubblegum act. I mean, they had no intent on creating, you know, music for children. The musicians were the Wrecking Crew. They worked with the Beach Boys and the Carpenters and all these incredible acts. And just because, you know, David Cassidy was now this teen idol that 5-year-olds loved or 10-year-olds loved, that skewed the age of appreciation down for the Partridge Family right off the bat.
Cassidy was so enraged by his manufactured pop star image that he called his manager to back out at the last minute, but his voice and his likeness were under contract for 7 years. So the show, with David Cassidy, would go on. The Partridge Family premiered on Friday, September 25th, 1970, right after The Brady Bunch and Nanny and the Professor. The critics ranted that the show had missed the bus completely, but the audience immediately climbed aboard for the ride.
The record broke before the show went on the air. It was a great promo, and it became a hit series.
The turbulent social environment of the early 70s also helped the show make its mark. The Partridge Family's ease and optimism couldn't have been better timed.
We came on during a period of great social upheaval, and television audiences tended to be much more middle of the road and really wanted to be assured that although this cultural revolution was happening, that the basic family unit was going to remain unchanged. That's what we did.
Just as TV audiences were warming up to the Partridge Family, the actors were getting wise to the limitations of the job.
You know, the Partridge Family was on during the Vietnam War, and it was, 30 minutes of freedom. It's like, dude, we were 5 white kids dressed up in red velvet like we were Superfly. Okay, it wasn't a huge, we didn't save America.
While the Partridge Clan was not about to save America, one of its members would take the country by storm and generate a teen idol hurricane. Within weeks of the Partridge Family's premiere, the show hit a 17.5 rating, and their album shot to number 4 on the charts. Not long after, I Think I Love You hit number 1. It would go on to sell 5 million copies, beating the Beatles' Let It Be by the year's end. But it wasn't just record sales making headlines. Young Danny Bonaducci was receiving accolades for his wit and sharp comic timing.
Very little downside risk.
Danny just had it, and not many kids do. He had timing. He knew how to underplay.
I'm worried about you, Mom. You're too old to be working.
Oh, thank you, honey.
You just made my day.
I knew my name was in the title of the show more than half the time. The show was called Danny Has a Girlfriend. Danny Goes on a Diet. Danny Grows Up. I got that, and I'd count the lines. So think 1, 2, 3, 4. I'd have 72 lines. David Cassidy got 54. I'm the star of the show, you know, and I was not shy about saying so.
Listen, when you're in show business, you gotta work all the angles.
Paired with comedy veteran Dave Madden, TV had a new dynamic duo in the making.
You members of some flaky religious group?
No, sir, I'm here to represent the Partridges.
The Birds?
The family.
While Danny played for laughs, his older brother played up his good looks. David Cassidy was becoming one of the hottest young faces in Hollywood, but Keith Partridge had to remain believable as an average teenager.
We found things also for David that made him, you know, a little flawed, you know, because otherwise he was a perfect kid, you know, so we sort of made him rather vain and things like that.
What do you usually do with girls in love with you?
Lord, you have a dirty mind. She's 11 years old.
Susan Day had been chosen for her looks, but the show's creators were determined to highlight more than just a pretty face.
And it'd be a groovy way to find out exactly what's wrong with this country.
What?
Well, I'd be able to see all the injustices firsthand.
Look, kids.
It was the first time that we saw young women be so politically proactive, and realistically, we needed to make that a part of the show.
I've been thinking about these lyrics.
Yeah, what about them?
Well, do you think they're really relevant?
Relevant? One lousy sit-in and suddenly she's Joan Baez.
And Shirley Jones was being hailed as the most liberated mom on primetime television.
Shirley Partridge was the first working mother in television.
She was a completely independent woman. She was guiding this family. She was their manager. She was their caretaker. It was a way to kind of reassure mothers, I think, around the country that you could be a strong mother under any circumstance.
Never thought I'd raise a quitter.
Who's a quitter?
You are. Danny, most things in life that people want aren't just handed to them. If you really want something, you have to keep trying.
You mean I should fight for Gloria?
That's exactly what I mean.
Shirley Partridge encouraged her children's talents, respected their individuality, and truly seemed to understand the trials and tribulations of being a teenager.
Mom, did you just tell me the facts of life?
Kids across America longed to join her brood.
Cold hands and warm heart, huh, Mom?
I had young teenagers come and camp on my lawn in Beverly Hills, take a bus from Iowa and get to California and come and sit on my lawn. We want to live in your home. We want you to be our mother. We want David Cassidy to be our brother, you know. And that happened more than once. And I would have to bring them in the house, find out where they lived, call their parents, give them fare to go home, you know, and tell them that this was fantasy. This is not reality, you know. So, but that was kind of the sad part of it, you know. Kids would runaways, and they wanted to live that life.
I think what's most believable about the show is just the connection between the family, just the obvious affection they all had for each other.
We were the family next door. Yes, they went to school and they did their homework, and I did cook. You know, I did have the roast in the oven. But we had that extra thing where we had to earn a living, and we were out there earning a living together. So we got to see each other on different levels, and I think that's what made it friendship as well. In other words, you know, we became friends, and that's what you saw too.
Occasionally, the line between friendly and familial got a little blurry.
Shirley every now and again got completely sucked into being our mom. I was misbehaving one time. I'm being some kind of jerk. I'm 10 and I'm a jerk by nature. And Shirley starts getting mad. And finally she looks at me and she goes, "Danny, you go to your room right now and you stay there till I say so." And I just look at her like, you've lost your mind. A, I'm not your actual kid, and B, there's no room up there. That stairway doesn't go anywhere, Shirley. It's fake.
The reality of a show built on the fairy tale of domestic harmony was questionable. But the actors' amplified fame was not. The Partridges had become bona fide stars, and swarms of screaming adolescents followed them everywhere. But the real breakout star, complete with puka shell choker and hipster shag haircut, was David Cassidy. Literally overnight, he became the teen sensation, surpassing the popularity of It Boys Bobby Sherman and Donny Osmond. By the show's second season, Cassidy had the highest audience rating of anyone on television.
They had no idea they were going to have the rock star of the century in their television show, and that just happened. I mean, they just couldn't believe it.
He wasn't a wild-haired hippie. He was safe on that level, yet he was just sexy enough to really get young girls. He was a very unthreatening sex symbol.
The mania went live when Cassidy's manager started booking him concert gigs. Soon he was selling out large stadiums, demanding $50,000 for his performances and topping Elvis's nightly income.
I mean, the music, David goes out on concert, he sings the songs, and people go crazy.
David Cassidy was the Beatles, Elvis Presley, David Cassidy phenomenon. Everything else is their distant second cousin of fame. It was certainly dangerous at times. I mean, there was mayhem at the gate. There'd be thousands of women. And sometimes David Cassidy either flown in by helicopter, literally 300 yards, or they'd cut a new hole in the fence to get him in.
Cassidy was intent on cutting himself a new image. One high-profile publicity stunt would do just that. And it would alter the Partridge family dynamic for good. Partridge family brought laughter into living rooms from Sacramento to Schenectady. And behind the scenes, the good humor was just as contagious.
Now remember, this is just a rough cut. Finished editing it this afternoon, so I haven't really seen it on the screen myself.
I'm gonna be terrific. It's one take Barlucci all the way. That there are lots of methods. I'm stuck.
Do you realize what this kind of publicity could do to us? We'd be lucky to get a gig of the Pink Pussycat. Brad, I'm gonna kill you.
What's there to explain? I'm never going in that grocery store again. Wrong line.
How are the plans coming for Ruben's party?
It is kind of spooky, though.
From the beginning.
Oh, sorry.
Go, Shirley.
Shirley! Sorry, did you call me?
Yeah, man.
David Cassidy and the rest of the Partridge family were still on top, but how long could they hope to remain there? And how could the writers rise to the challenge of keeping the show on its toes?
Several of the stories that were written came right from my own household. The writers would come and spend a day or two on the weekend or something and just kind of follow the kids around and me around, and see what would happen. And several stories came out of that.
A stream of guest stars also joined the clan. Jodie Foster, Mark Hamill, Howard Cosell, Hollywood veterans Ray Bolger and Rosemary DeCamp even signed on as Partridge grandparents. But one episode and its guest stars proved particularly memorable.
We did one in a black neighborhood where they ended up in a black nightclub by mistake, and that was with Richie Pryor. It was a marvelous episode.
Lou Gossett Jr. and Richard Pryor were in a show. They had a firehouse, and we went there to raise money for them so that they could keep the firehouse.
We were playing with race, we were playing with race music, we were playing with what was really happening first in the 60s but into the 70s, where the cultures were crossing to an unprecedented degree.
I remember a direct quote, this being said to Richard Pryor. Ready? I don't know how you're going to show this, but I remember a producer looking at him with a big smile on his face and saying, hey, Richard, you can't call the 10-year-old mother, okay? Is that cool?
The first season we were on the air, we did a lot of interesting things. However, as soon as the network found out that they were a hit, they started running scared. And they said, we can't do this. We've got to have these people do a normal life. And so they started writing scripts like Keith fails sex education in school, and Danny gets acne, you know, really fun, interesting stories like that.
Keith might have been failing sex ed, but David Cassidy was soaring as teenage America's #1 sex symbol. Yet he still longed for the attentions of a more mature audience. Like many rock stars before him, Cassidy headed straight for the cover of Rolling Stone magazine. In hopes of shedding the fabricated boy-next-door charade, he did a glossy 8x10 striptease in front of the entire nation. Much to the dismay of the network, David Cassidy was on the verge of compromising his very lucrative teen icon image. The Partridge Family had become a gold mine for screen gems, and they wanted it to stay that way.
The show was simply there to make money.
David started to become so hot, and the popularity of the show grew. And then, obviously, the merchandising started. I mean, it was everywhere.
Besides the best-selling albums and flashy teen fan magazine covers, the show spawned lunchboxes, bubblegum wrappers, pillowcases, board games, paper dolls, even a full series of paperback mystery books. Originally budgeted at $120,000 an episode, the Partridge Family money machine was raking in millions. The individual cast members, however, were not.
Okay, so here's a guy, David Cassidy. He's doing 80 hours a week on the Partridge Family, for which he gets paid $600. No 401k Partridge Family. There's none of that.
Somebody made a lot of money. You know, that's all I can say is somebody made a lot of money.
By 1972, it was watched all over the world, from Zambia to New Zealand. Grammy and Golden Globe Award nominations mounted. David Cassidy's debut solo album went gold. Multiple personal hurdles had also been overcome. Jeremy Gelbwax was dismissed from the cast and replaced by Brian Forster.
We changed kids at the end of the first year. I don't think I got one letter. Nobody even noticed or cared.
They took a ruler and they said, we're going to replace the shorter one. And they measured, you know, and they said, sorry, you're the shortest, you got to go. And that was it.
The substitution highlighted an ongoing dilemma with the show's young stars.
Well, there goes your mama's perfect theory.
They were just sort of props that moved, you know, sometimes. And they were sweet, but you couldn't give them lines. You couldn't write scenes for them because they were too young.
I don't anticipate that they thought, you know, they found this talent. So it was just a cute kid that kind of matched the family.
Behind the scenes, Susan Day had waged a battle against anorexia and bulimia.
She just turned orange one day. She actually ate nothing but carrots. I'm not sure I ever heard of anorexia at the time even. You can't believe how thin she was. Fortunately for Susan, she got out of it.
Danny Bonaducci had his own problems, a separation from his abusive father.
I would bring Danny out so that he didn't have to go home, you know, because sometimes he'd come back on Monday morning beat up.
And more troubles lay ahead. David Cassidy was growing tired of his grueling schedule. He was exhausting the image of the charmed pop star, and he was beginning to test the patience of his co-stars.
David started doing concerts every weekend. I mean, he'd leave Friday night after we finished shooting an episode, get on an airplane and be doing concerts Saturday and Sunday, and have to show up Monday, you know, for the reading of the next week's episode. And sometimes would be late, and sometimes even the day of shooting would be late. And that was a big concern to me.
Where have you been? You said you'd be here.
I know. I couldn't help it, Mom.
You know, he would go off on weekends, then he had to come back and he had to pre-record all the songs, and he had to learn his lines.
He's wearing clothes just like Keep rolling, so right from the top.
It was exhausting for him. You know, I certainly understand why he didn't necessarily want to do it anymore. It was killing him.
A frustrated David Cassidy was about to place the show in jeopardy and to confront a fatal challenge to his short pop star career. In its third season, The Partridge Family was one of the top 20 shows in America. In September of 1973, it was plucked from its 8:30 spot on Friday nights and packed off to Saturdays at 8 p.m., putting it up against the critical powerhouse All in the Family. To complicate matters, David Cassidy, forever the show's frontman, wanted out.
He doesn't like the music. He doesn't want to wear the red suit anymore. He's over the puka shells. And then they turn his character into a buffoon.
It's not fair. I mean, I can understand a guy wanting revenge, but why must the innocent always suffer?
I think that David was uncomfortable. He wanted out. That was true.
Cassidy finally turned in his resignation. The once harmonious Partridge Family was clearly off-key. ABC canceled the show, airing the last episode on March 23, 1974.
I would have gone on for another 4 years. I mean, I thought the show could grow. I thought we had other episodes that we could do. I mean, I saw it going other places. And then a show like All in the Family came on, and that was a whole different look at a family. They said, you know what, it's, maybe it's old hat now. They felt that it would not hold up against All in the Family.
If there was a possibility that you could be arrested for murder for killing a show, ABC would be in prison right now. We had Friday night locked for all the first 3 years. So what did they do? They moved us to Saturday night and put us opposite the #1 show in the country. Well, that's tantamount to murder.
Primarily, probably the ratings had dropped. The show was on 4 years. It was riding a gimmick because it was tied into music, so we just replaced it. I can't remember what we replaced it with.
The show was going to go away anyway. There wasn't a Partridge Family without David Cassidy. I could be funny and cute all day. That show was not going to stay on the air without Keith Partridge.
Despite all its selling points, a hit show isn't a hit without its star.
People can say all they want about great shows being canceled, You can make a beautiful sport jacket, and you could sell it at Neiman Marcus, and everybody comes in and says it's a beautiful sport jacket. If they don't buy the sport jacket don't get made no more. And that's what television is. It's people make a vote every time they go to the TV set, and they have a lot of power. Believe me, they have a lot of power.
The power of Cassidy mania hadn't waned, and in one case, it would prove fatal. In May of 1974, 14-year-old Bernadette Whelan was crushed to death by the crowd at one of Cassidy's stadium shows in London. He felt compelled to bow out of touring. With the show that had made him a star now off the air, David Cassidy abandoned his place in the spotlight. As for the rest of the cast, it was time to fly on to other projects. Jeremy Gelbwax would later build a career in television production and earn an MBA from Columbia University. Brian Forster studied zoology and became a professional race car driver. After some work on several short-lived television series and made-for-TV movies, Suzanne Crowe attended college and ran a bookstore. Susan Day continued to cultivate a successful television career, playing lead characters in LA Law and Love and War. Dave Madden had a recurring role on the hit sitcom Alice and became a popular voiceover artist. Shirley Jones focused on her singing career and continued to make guest appearances on television throughout the years, culminating in her hilarious role as Drew's cradle-robbing girlfriend on The Drew Carey Show.
I had a great time. I did 3 episodes, and Marion Ross was his mother, which was hysterical. And of course, Danny Bonaducci was my son in one of the episodes.
After years of battling alcohol and drug addiction, Danny Bonaducci became a successful radio DJ and co-host of the talk show The Other Half.
My career after the Partridge Family. High school, obscurity, humiliation, homelessness, drugs, Geraldo, radio, jail, Geraldo, radio, The Other Half. Thank you. I'll be here all week.
And David Cassidy, after an early retirement at the tender age of 24, returned to the live concert circuit in 1991. After critically acclaimed roles in Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat and Blood Brothers, Cassidy forged a successful performance career in Las Vegas. He plays to crowds of adoring fans to this day. Partridges themselves never let the spotlight stray from the importance of family.
The show was really the family staying together, working together, and having fun.
Of course, like all real families, the Partridges weren't always in perfect sync.
We have a common problem. This is our problem.
But in the end, they always managed to strike the right chords.
Well, how did your personal conference with Danny go?
He is really something else.
I know.
You know, you are too. I mean, I never knew what it was like to have responsibilities to kids before. It's not easy. It sure has made me appreciate you a lot more.
Well, you are a little young to be raising 4 kids.
Oh, I'm old enough to handle it, all right. It's just it doesn't leave me enough time to do my homework.
There was an affection, there was a mutual respect for each other, and there was a sense of humor. All of them really, in one way or another, had the ability to laugh at themselves. And that's not a bad thing really to hold up as an example, to teach people.
It's that timeless humor that keeps the Partridge Family laugh track rolling to this day.
We got to know each other as people and not just brothers and sisters and mother. That's what made the show so interesting, and I think interesting even for people to see today. Because we had problems, but we stuck together. We were a family.
The amazing thing about all these shows, that they go on forever. I mean, they seem to. The one that Partridge Family was, what, 30 years ago? 30 years ago. And they're still running it. What's good is good and will always be good. It's that something just works.
And how cool would it have been as a kid to travel around with your family and sing rock music in a band? I mean, it was sort of like a fantasy that you could almost relate to in a way. You used to watch the Bradys, but you used to want to be a Partridge.
I think the Partridge Family was a fine family role model. I don't think it's incredibly believable, but I think it represents the American family, if not as it is, certainly as some of us would like it to be.
Shirley Jones still maintains that her favorite song of the 70s is David Cassidy's #1 hit, I Think I Love You. David's 15-year-old daughter, Katie, earlier this year released her own hip-hop version of the song, introducing it to yet another generation. Now it's time for the Biography and USA Today viewer poll results. We asked you to vote at biography.com for your favorite TV entertainer, and here are your top 5 choices.